And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today, we're talking about the most recent trade rumors around the Chicago Bulls, as we have a new trade rumor that links Nikola Vucevic and Anfernee Simons. Next, we're going to be talking about the trade noise that is around Coby White and Ayo Dosunmu. And so before we go ahead and we jump into that, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Monis Buzelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the most recent trade rumor here around the Chicago Bulls. And so if you've not got a chance to see this, this is on Clutch Points. This is written by Brett Siegel. And so within this article, he talks about several players and just really what he's hearing around the NBA. And so first, before we jump into Vucevic and Anfernee Simons, he talks about Johnathan Kuminga. He still has the Chicago Bulls along with the Miami Heat linked to Johnathan Kuminga as a possible destination. But he does say that the Sacramento Kings have jumped over the Brooklyn Nets as a possible destination now for Johnathan Kuminga. And so we'll see how that goes. And so a little bit of an update there around the Johnathan Kuminga noise. But next, I think it gets interesting because as you scroll through the article, it gets to a section about Anfernee Simons and really talking about the Boston Celtics and where they are right now. And so he starts off by talking about how the Boston Celtics have really shed just about $2 million in salary with the Drew Holiday and the also Kristaps Porzingis deal. And he talks about how at this point in time, the Boston Celtics are still above the first tax apron. And so they're still trying to get under that. And he talks about George Niang at $8.2 million, and then also to Anfernee Simons, who just came over from Portland at $27.6 million, and how both of those contracts can be moved, but both contracts cannot be combined. And so that's exactly what he says there in the article. And at the end, he just reiterates that the Celtics will continue to revamp the roster around Jaylen Brown and Derek White. And so here is what he had to say about Nikola Vucevic and Anfernee Simons, which is very, very interesting here. And so once again, this is clearly just speculation, but this is what Brett Siegel had to say. So I'm going to move that out the way. And then I'm also, too, going to move this out the way at the top so we can take a look here. And so as you can see, it says that Simon's situation is unique as he is a young talent who could fit into the Celtics' plans right away with Tatum out, as well as some other teams' agenda. After trading Lonzo Ball on Saturday and continuing to field calls about Coby White, the Chicago Bulls may need a new guard next to Josh Giddey, who the team intends to resign in free agency. The Bulls like to play fast and shoot a lot of threes, which would fit Simon's style of play perfectly. More importantly, from Boston's point of view, Nikola Vucevic is a veteran big man who would make a lot of sense as a one-year replacement for Porzingis. Such a swap would immediately move the Celtics out of the first apron and give them a key veteran at center. And then it says this, and so I'm going to reiterate this, but it says that although there is no confirmation that the two teams have discussed such a scenario, the Celtics have been mentioned by league sources as a team with interest in Vucevic previously. Any player on an expiring contract will be someone that the Boston has interest in. And so that right there is the entire excerpt there about Anfernee Simons and then also to Nikola Vucevic. Once again, you can go over to Clutch Points and you can read this for yourself, just moving that out the way so you can see that last line. And so, look, I think that this is interesting. And let's start with just what this would possibly mean for both sides. And just really does it make sense? And so starting with Vooch and the idea of him going to the Boston Celtics. And so, look, I think that this does make a ton of sense for the Boston Celtics, especially when you're talking about an expiring contract and the fact that he's making a little over $21 million. And so you do save, a little bit there in bringing over Vooch. But I think more importantly, this is a player that fits the style that the Celtics want to play as far as their offensive style. They want to get up 3-point shots and things like that. We know that Vooch definitely wants to shoot it. and he's coming off a great year shooting the three ball at 40.2%. So it was a great season for him. We know that Vooch can knock down free throws. He shot 80.5%, and he's a double-double. So 18.5 points and 10.1 rebounds a game there. So, too, you look at the fact that he was 53% from the field. And so the Celtics would get a player that fits their play style. And I think that it's great that he's shown that he can play with the Chicago Bulls and that up-tempo style. And so I think that the Boston Celtics, if they want to run a little bit more next season, then that fits there. But defensively, you probably have some pieces around Vooch that maybe are able to hide some of his defensive flaws there. So I know, if they bring back Al Horford, he's definitely going to be counted on there, along with whoever else that they bring back to help the interior. But Boston has some good perimeter defense there too, so that actually would help Vooch, and so I could see that would work. And so again, you get a player that's coming in off an efficient season, really, I think rehabbed his trade value, so to speak. And I just think that, when you're looking for a win now situation and a plug and play piece, it's definitely going to be Vooch. And I think for the Celtics here, as far as acquiring him, I think that this is a win-win situation because not only do they get the size and a player that fits for them, but there's the real possibility that the Celtics may not have to give up draft capital. And I'm just assuming that. And I mean, there's no guarantee that if this deal were to happen, that there wouldn't be some draft picks involved. But honestly, I mean, when you look at just what the Chicago Bulls have done as far as moving off of their core, they've moved 4 of the 5 guys that were really major core pieces for this team. And they've only got back their own first round pick. And then they've also got back 2 second rounders. And we just saw that they moved one of their core guys in Lonzo Ball for just a player for player swap. And so for the Celtics, the fact that they would be able to pretty much set themselves up with a plug and play center right now and not have to give up draft capital, I think that that's a win-win situation for them. And honestly, I think for Vooch, who, he probably wants to play in a winning situation on an expiring contract, I would think that Vooch would strongly consider coming back to the Boston Celtics and maybe taking even lesser money to come back if Jason Tatum is going to come back at full strength and then allow the Boston Celtics to perhaps go ahead and just really revamp their roster to make a serious run. And so I think it's a win-win situation for both of them. As for the Chicago Bulls and looking at this from Anfernee Simons, and so, look, I think that this is where it becomes interesting for the Bulls because I don't see that this is going to be something where I say to myself, like, all right, this is going to push the Bulls over the top or anything like that because Anfernee Simons, he's 26 years old. And so it is a win in the sense that you would get a younger player. And so that's a plus. You do get an expiring contract back at $27 million. And so that is a 1-year expiring contract. So that's good. With the numbers, I mean, you can see a player that is certainly productive at this point in time. And so he's coming in and he's listed as 6'3". And so 19.3 points a game, 2.7 rebounds, 0.1 with the blocks, 0.9 in the steals. He shot 90.2% from the free throw line. He could be 2.6 from the field in 32.7 minutes. And so you do get a player that's younger. You get a player that can score. You get a player that definitely fits your style of play. And I guess from the front office standpoint, the Chicago Bulls would get a player that is young and also, too, that has some experience that fits the way that they want to continue to try to build out the Chicago Bulls. And so those are all pluses here. But I think really the issue that I'm having here with this is that it just seems like that you're adding more to the guards, which I think that is an issue with the Chicago Bulls, that they have a lot of guards. I still think that the front court is something that they really have to address. And they have a situation at the guard position because you would have Anfernee Simons on a expiring deal. You also, at that point in time, would have Ayo Dosunmu and then Coby White on an expiring deal. Now, we'll get to them in a moment, but just assuming that they did a 1-for-1 swap. And so you have all of those players there. And so the question is, what do you do with that? Because you also still have a player in Trey Jones that you could possibly bring back. And we'll talk about that in a moment too, that the Bulls maybe have interest there. And so you could have a guard heavy type of team. And I'm not sure that necessarily pushes you forward because with the front court, you're losing Vooch, and I get with Vooch being older and everything else, but you still need to get some stability at the center position because the bottom line is, for as good as you are as far as getting up and down the floor, when you get into a play-in situation, yes, a play-in or a playoff situation, when the games get tighter and they slow down, you have to be able to be really effective in the half-court offense, and you need to have a player that can get close to the basket and can score his own points. And so I think that that is still a need. So you do want a stretch player that can go and play on the perimeter, but you also need an interior presence on the offensive side of the ball. And then on top of that, you still would be not addressing what you need defensively, because I think that even with Anfernee Simons added and let's say you're keeping all those guards, where is the rim protection going to come from? Because I get it with Zach Collins. He's definitely a guy that was a lot more physical at the rim than I think that Vooch, and he also too could move a little bit more along with Jalen Smith. But I wonder, is that something that Billy Donovan really trusts? Because we saw that Jalen Smith had some DMPs. Heck, we even saw that Zach Collins got his minutes cut down when Vooch was there. And so, does Billy Donovan really trust them to move forward? And I just think that the answer for the long term here, and that's the key word, long term, is that you need to get some stability at the center position, because it just seems like that this is a move that is more lateral, doesn't take you forward, doesn't necessarily take you backwards, and you're still not addressing what you have to get done in the future. And it would be not a good decision, I think, for the Chicago Bulls not to take back draft picks. And so, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and now jump over to the next portion here quickly. And I wanted to talk about just the recent noise here around Ayo and Coby. And so if you want to take a look at this, you can go over to sportsillustrated.com. This is under their fast break portion. But within this, look, there is some tweets from Casey Johnson and another NBA insider really talking about the noise around Ayo Dosunmu. And so let's go ahead and let's first bring up what Casey Johnson had to say. This was shortly after the trade happened with Lonzo Ball. And so you could see that the Chicago Bulls might have some interest here in re-signing Trey Jones, and then also too with Josh Giddey, which I think is going to be a foregone conclusion, but more so the top there where he's talking about the chatter, right? And so he said he's hearing more chatter around Ayo Dosunmu more than Coby White. And so, I know both of these players have been in trade rumors, but the fact that, they are looking to move on from Ayo Dosunmu, I think it's going to be very interesting. I think that if they are serious about, bringing in an Anfernee Simons, it does make sense to move on from one of those guards. And let me be honest here, I'm not in the camp of moving away from either, because with Coby White, I'll say this, I mean, you're losing some size if you go ahead and you trade for Anfernee Simons and you're moving off of Coby White here, because Coby White is 6'5", and so you're not gaining any size back there in the backcourt. And I get it. He's on a $12 million expiring contract. He's likely headed to a big extension. He's 25 years old. But, man, just looking at what he did last season with the 20.4 points per game, he shot 90.2 from the free throw line, which is identical to Anfernee Simons. 37.6% from downtown, and so slightly better than Anfernee Simons, and 45.3% from the field. And so that was better than Anfernee Simons, which is why I'm talking about if you would be moving him, for Anfernee Simons, I just think that you're looking at more so a lateral type of deal and not anything that takes you forward necessarily backwards. And then with Ayo, look, Ayo, the bottom line with him is he is a legit two-way player. He brings some toughness to us. He brings some leadership to us. And I trust between Coby White and Ayo Dosunmu, if they have tough times, these guys generally figure it out. I love the fact that they are with all the smoke of just trying to get better as players and as a team. And I love that. These guys will run through the wall. It's just unfortunate that these guys have had to take roles where their roles have changed, I think, over time. And then now we get to this point where they're in contract situations where they're coming off team-friendly contracts. And now the Bulls have to make a decision. And it looks like that they might have to move on from one or both of these players. And so with Ayo, I think it would be unfortunate because this guy has been a glue guy. It was unfortunate that he lost the rest of the season due to the shoulder. But at 12.3 points, 4.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds, 0.4 with the blocks, 0.9 with the steals, and 78.5% from the free throw line. Look, solid numbers with the 49.2 from the field, 32.8 from three. Not his best, but still he is a one-person fast break. And so, I think it's interesting. You guys let me know in the comments, are you okay with the Bulls moving on from one or both of these players? I do think that a decision has to be made. And just let me know, too, what do you think? Should the Chicago Bulls, should they be interested in a possible deal if this is on the table for and Anfernee Simons, if that is the case? And once again, this is strictly, again, just trade rumors, speculation. Again, going back to that, there is no official talks that have taken place, but this is something that was written in Clutch Points if you guys want to take a look at it. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here, what are the Chicago Bulls going to do as we have free agency coming up? And man, I tell you what, if they do move on from Vooch, you have to think, what are they going to do with Zach Collins? Because he has an expiring deal. And then also too, Jalen Smith, he has like a couple more seasons left. But if you're giving him DMPs, you better find a way to get a center out here. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Bulls. And I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.